So in this very first video support lecture, what I'm going to do is essentially create two simple objects. We'll make a high poly variant as well as a low poly obviously, and we'll export those and put them into Painter. So what we're trying to get an understanding of here is how to create essentially two UV maps or two materials, so you could put them into Painter and effectively have two different UV sets and two different textures. Obviously, in your ICA, you're allowed two 4096s, so split up your mesh accordingly, and obviously give one side 4096 and the other 4096, and confirm that the textile rate is correct before you do any texturing, which I'll cover shortly. For the time being, let's just figure out how to make two assets and put them into Painter, and hopefully have two different UV sets to work from. So I'm using Maya. Obviously you know how to do all these basic principles using Max. Not exactly difficult. So there's one of my assets. I'm just going to duplicate that, and effectively that's going to be my secondary one. So my secondary one, what I'll do is I'll just make it somewhat larger. So we've got effectively two objects, and what we need to do is assign one material to this and another material to this. And then that way, when we put it into Painter, we'll have two different UV sets to play with. So we obviously want a high poly variant to do our bakes from, so I'm just going to press Ctrl D in this instance, and we can see now I've got a duplicate copy of that. You can obviously use Ctrl V or Shift in Max to create a secondary copy. So with my secondary one, I'm just going to bevel the edges. To bevel those edges, I'll just go to wireframe, try and get an understanding of what's going on. Just whack the number of segments up. That will do. So there is my high poly for my first object, and for the second one I'll do the same. I'm just going to duplicate that and just bevel the edges. Just select all those edges and bevel the edges. Go back a touch. And I'll whack the number of segments up. That will do. So we've got our low poly and we've got our high poly setup. Obviously we need to ensure our naming conventions make sense. If I was to have multiple objects, then yes, naming conventions would be very important. But for the purpose of this, our assets are essentially going to be exported out as effectively a single FBX with two materials. So what I'll do is I'll just attach these two together. Just turn off my grid so I can make sense of what's on screen. So there's our high poly and there's our high poly, so I'll combine these two together. And obviously we want our low poly as well. Combine those together. Obviously we have 90-degree angles here, so we need to make sure within our UV editor there's sufficient number of breaks. So currently we have this at the moment. This is Maya's default. So logically, if I just use automatic mapping or box mapping in your case, that will generally do the job for you. So we have no overlapping UVs. Every single one of these faces is correct in terms of the textile rate as well. So we can just press, we can in fact just press unfold on that, or peel in your case, just to confirm things are good, which they are. And I'm going to use the pack option within here, which is called layout in Maya. So I'm just going to confirm that there is a gap of 2 pixels roughly between each of the shells, and just hit layout UVs, and it's already done what it needs to have done anyway. So that there is sufficient enough. So let's export this into Substance Painter with two different materials. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to assign a different material to this. And it might be worthwhile, I probably could just select the polys and apply a material to that. But I think what I will do is I'll actually detach that, my low poly one. So I'm just going to click on extract faces. So I should have two components, which effectively, that's going to be my high, and that's going to be my low there. So let's just select that one. Try and get somewhere near it to select it, I suppose. There we are. So I'll just apply another material to this particular one, and we've already got a default material on one, so we just need to essentially make another material and pop it into this. Obviously in your case, just press M, make a new material, and just assign that. I'll just make another blend. It's worthwhile naming these appropriately, and obviously try and color coordinate them as well. That would make a lot of sense. If you just make one red, for example, and call it texture 1, and let's just assign that to here. There we are, so that's texture 1 there. I'm going to make another blend, and I'll call this texture 2. And again, color coordination is going to help in terms of identifying what's what. So my other particular low poly, which is that one there, I can have this material. So let's now export our low polys. I'm going to just delete history as well while I'm here. In your case, it would be reset transformations or reset xform. My version is somewhat different. Effectively, I need to delete all by type history, which is equivalent of collapsing a stack within Max, and also freeze transformations, which is reset transformations in your case in 3ds Max. So that's our low poly selected. I'm going to confirm that I've got those selected. Oop, I've got everything selected. That one there, and let's export this out as LP, our low poly asset. So export selection. We do need to make sure that I'm going to put mine into test bakes. We do need to make sure that our low poly export is always done with smoothing groups and triangulate on. Give it a name. In this case, I'll call it LP. Export selection, and I should be able to just invert the selection. In this case, Control-Shift-I. That should allow me to just select the high poly, which are these two, and I'll just export these out as the high poly. So I'll call this HP, and with our high poly, smoothing groups on and triangulate off. So that will do. Let's just quickly load that up into Painter and find out what's going on. So File, New. So the methodology you need to adopt, especially for mechanical and environment, come to think about it, is you want to make sure that you've got PBR, metal roughness. So let me just try and zoom in to find out. PBR, metal roughness, algorithmic, metallic roughness, that will do. So you don't want to be using speck or glossiness. You need to you can actually try some of the metallic roughness high quality, but I'm not quite sure what that does. I'm not quite sure what alpha test does. But just stick with metallic roughness. So let's select our low poly. In this instance, we just need to go to our desktop and locate that. I'll just locate that in a second. So I've got my low poly here. Just select that. Document resolution at 2048. Make sure you always use DirectX. Click on OK. So there we have our low poly. Just confirm that the smoothing groups are indeed correct. So wherever there's a 90-degree edge, we do in fact have a break within the smoothing group. And I'm just going to click on Bake Textures and 2048 and select your high poly. In this case, this is this one over here. Click on OK. For those of you that are trying to, be ahead of the game, I suppose, you can already see here we have texture 1 and texture 2. So those two are now separate UVs and effectively separate textures, because we create one material for one and another material for another. So let's just bake this while we're here. So no need for worrying about match, because effectively we've just got two independent objects, so that's not going to be an issue. And I'll just turn my subsampling up to 4x4, and our high poly suffix is HP and underscore LP. We don't necessarily need to do this step because effectively our object is just separated anyway, yeah. So we're not matching by mesh name, but obviously you would match by mesh name if you are doing it properly with multiple components that need to be named. But for the purpose of this demo, it's fine. If I click on Bake Texture 1 Set, it will essentially only bake the normal map onto one particular material. So in this instance, obviously we've got two materials, so we want to bake a normal map for both materials, so we need to click on Bake All Texture Sets. And just agree with that. I'll just pause it and wait. So now that the paint has effectively rendered that out, let's have a look to see what we've got. So that looks good to go, and likewise that one looks good to go as well. So if we look at this carefully, what we've done is we've created two independent UV sets, or essentially materials. So texture 1, which is this one over here, and we have texture 2, which is that one over there. So you can obviously, whatever you've selected here, this is where you will do your operations. So if I was to create some form of quick material to add on top of that, so let's just put some mortar wall on that one. I'll just show the other one. I'll also select the other one to make sure we're on that one, and then I can just drop on plastic gloss there. And now you've got essentially two different materials and effectively two different texture sets. You can confirm by pressing F2 and F3. Essentially, F1 will show you dual 3D and UV, F2 will just show you the actual mesh itself, and F3 will just show the UV. So if we look at this carefully, if I just click on F1 so we can see both, when I have texture 2 selected, and essentially this is the UVs for texture 2, if I select texture 1, these are the UVs for texture 1. So hopefully that will make sense. So relatively straightforward. The key is going to be how you split your UVs up to maintain as much texel rate as possible. So if you have an object comprising of 30 components, essentially you are going to have two materials for that component, for that object, sorry. Then obviously you've got to make a judgment call over which objects or which elements of those 30 objects go into one and which go into the other. So there is no right and wrong over which set goes into which. It's ultimately all about trying to maintain the best texel rate possible. So the next example, we use a more real-world example of a complex object, and then we can try and determine what's going to happen in terms of doing things correctly in relation to rushing it and essentially not giving it the maximum texel rate. Just as a side note, obviously take a note of the fact that what I haven't done is optimize each individual UV correctly for each material. Clearly, this can be optimized further, but we'll see that in the next example.